Our second speaker, speaking on the topic, shifting organizational culture through innovative HR leadership. And as part of representation, she'll be touching on these key objectives: how to build a leadership culture and mindset; 2, how to identify the role of ethics in employee productivity and organizational development; and thirdly, how to understand the relationship between organizational culture, leadership behavior, and job satisfaction. She's the managing director of Busara Africa, a Pan-African leadership development firm. She's a leadership trainer, professional coach, and organizational development specialist with over 20 years professional experience working with civil society, the private sector, and various government agencies in East, West, and Southern Africa, and in Europe and in the United States. She therefore combines an understanding of international best practice on leadership and organizational development with an appreciation of the African context in which these principles should be applied. She's been working and living in Ghana for the last 15 years. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Harvard University, a Master of Arts, and a Juris Doctorate in Law from Columbia University, New York. She also has a certificate in organizational development from the Organizational Development Center and the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland, United States, and an advanced certificate in coaching from the International Coaching Academy, Melbourne, Australia. She's a member of the International Coaching Federation. She sits on the board of the African Women's Development Fund and the board of the West African Civil Society Institute. She is also the coordinator of the Association of Coaching Practitioners in Ghana. With a round of applause, let's welcome Taaka Awori.
Good morning. No, I have to take that one more time. Good morning. We talked about getting some energy in here. I'm really excited to be with you all this morning. And I think I would like to begin with a story. It's a story about a company I did some work with, a company not here in Ghana, but a company that was struggling. They were struggling because there were new entrants into the market, and they were finding it difficult to compete because the new entrants that came into the market were offering a lot more innovative products, more exciting things for the consumers. And this particular company I was working with was finding that the pattern of employee behavior was not producing innovation. Essentially, what was happening is that when people would try and think outside of the box, they would be shot down. When anyone tried to do something new and they made a mistake, they would come down very hard on them. When anyone tried to express an opinion that was different from the norm, they were challenged. And so as a result, this company realized they were regurgitating the same old, same old. Their problem was culture. They even had a wonderful value statement where innovation was part of their values. But what people were doing on a day-to-day basis, the pattern of behavior was very different. And the problem was culture. So I was very excited to see that the HR focus today, one of the key topics in addition to talent, was the major issue of organizational culture. And for ease of this presentation, let me just define culture as the way we do things around here. Many of us have walked into an organization and immediately realized that, there's a particular way of doing things around here. They said that 8 o'clock is the starting time, but we notice people stroll in at 9:30. Or they said 9 o'clock was the starting time, but we noticed by 7:30, everybody's sitting at their desk. Nobody told me that. That's the culture. So the way we do things around here. Now, the reason why I'm finding this, again, a very exciting topic is that we can start to reflect on why organizational culture and why is HR leadership so critical when we start to talk about organizational culture. One thing we have learned for sure, and I think you all as HR practitioners have seen it yourselves, is that culture will trump your policies, your strategies, your value statements. We've all seen situations where, again, we'll have wonderful policies written up. Sometimes they'll be our HR policies, sometimes there'll be other lovely policies. They'll be on paper, but what happens in reality becomes something completely different. We will have procedures written down, but the way in which people actually implement those procedures will be more a reflection of culture. So in this sense, culture therefore is critical in shaping and prescribing employee behavior. Ultimately, culture determines and influences your bottom line, your ability to achieve your organizational mission, which is why it's critical we have a conversation about how we can shift culture, how we can influence culture. And this is where it's so critical to see HR leadership. HR not only plays a critical role in shaping culture, but HR also needs to be innovative in how you shape culture. If we continue to do the same things we've been doing all the time in terms of how we change culture, what will we see? The same results. So this is an invitation to think about how we influence and shape culture differently. And I would like to frame my presentation this morning around some of the mistakes I have seen happen in terms of influencing and changing culture and what we can do about it. Because if there's one area where I've seen so many of us falter, have failures, false starts, it's around organizational change, and in particular, around influencing and shifting culture. So I'm going to run through very quickly 5 mistakes I have seen organizations or companies play, and often HR has been complicit in that, and 5 actions we can take, things we can do differently to change how we influence culture. I'll run through them very quickly, and if you're interested in getting the full presentation, I'm here with my colleague. Give us your cards and we'll email you the full presentation later on. Mistake number 1. Mistake number 1. We are not intentional and explicit enough about culture. Too often what we find is that culture is implicit. As I gave the same example I gave earlier, you're new to an organization, you see something happening, but nobody has actually said it. You simply observe, this is the way we do things around here. When we're not happy about the patterns of behavior that comprise our organizational culture, often it will be part of a one-on-one conversation, but rarely or not often enough do we come to the table formally to say, these are the patterns of organizational culture, the patterns of behavior that comprise organizational culture that we're struggling with, that don't work for us. This is the behavior or pattern of behavior that we do need to see. So too often we're not intentional about how we shift it, and we're not explicit enough about what's not working and what does need to work going forward. So going forward, first action is indeed the need to look in the mirror. Looking in the mirror at your organization and your company about what are those patterns of behavior that are working for us that we have to say, this is the way we do things around here, and that pattern of behavior enables us to achieve our mission and bottom line, but also being able to name with candor and honesty the patterns of behavior that are not serving us. So that's the first step, looking in the mirror. But often, and this I think is a key role that HR can play, we have to create a safe space for it. Particularly if the patterns of behavior are reflective of leadership. If those patterns of behavior are things that we see the managers doing, too often people are not talking about it formally. Where are they talking about it? In the washroom, by the ice cooler, in the kitchen, over our wache in the morning. But we're not bringing it to the plate to say in formal sessions, this is the behavior that's problematic. So creating a safe space for it. Once we have defined and looked in the mirror about this is working, this is what's not working, then we also need to clearly say, so what are those patterns of behavior? And again, remember I keep saying culture are patterns of behavior that are acceptable or not acceptable in an organization. So what are those patterns of behavior? What is the culture we do want to see? And this is where all your value statements that many of your companies have come into play. So your values will give you a starting point for saying that if innovation is a key value, if participation is a key value, what are the behaviors that reflect it? And it should get that granular, that practical. This shouldn't be a guessing game. Our teams need to know exactly what we mean and what's expected of us in terms of the behavior. So you've defined what's not working where you are now, looked in the mirror, you've defined where you want to be, then you need to make a compelling case for it. And often I find, and this is a discussion that came up last year, I remember at the HR forum, many times when you're coming from the HR space, making a compelling case for it is also about linking it to the bottom line. The profits. The mission, how does that behavior affect whether the company or organization is thriving? That's how we make a compelling case and some urgency around it. So action number 1, becoming more intentional and explicit about culture. Moving on, action number 2. Okay, let's see, I think. Okay, before I move to action number 2, I should move to the second mistake we make. The second mistake we make is that, and this is often the different one, we exempt leaders from modeling the behavior we want to see. So we recognize that there is a problem. We even recognize that many times it is the leaders right at the top who are part of the problem. But we think, that one is too hard. So let me do a training program for middle management. Let me do a training program for the up-and-coming leaders. And we leave those ones behind. And what is the result? People are like, you will talk. Yes, we'll go on our training program, but we will follow what the leaders are doing. Not what they're saying, but what they're doing. So that's the mistake number 1. We're exempting those leaderships. So what do we need to be doing about it? We need to support them to model it, to walk the talk. Trying to institute culture change unless leaders are actually modeling that behavior is actually almost a waste of time. Because people can almost see the hypocrisy in it. So supporting them to align their behaviors to the values you want to see. And at this level, you may not be taking them on a training course, but in this level, probably it's about coaching. And this is the real value of coaching at that level, to ensure that they are aligning their behavior. But it's also ensuring that the assessment and promotion and progression of leaders is not simply based on seniority, how long they've been there. All of that is fine, but it goes further. they're actually assessed in terms of alignment with the expected behavior, particularly if that behavior is about your values. And this is a key part of where HR comes in. How are you assessing or determining who gets promoted into leadership positions? And how is that aligned to the behavior you're expecting to see? And finally, it's working with leaders to make sure that decision-making is indeed aligned and is done in a way that reflects the kind of values you want to see. So mistake number 3, we don't recruit for it. And what do I mean by this? Many times our recruitment as HR can be very focused on the qualifications, previous experience, the technical competencies. All of that is fantastic, it's wonderful, but it's not sufficient. How do you start to learn? How do you incorporate into your recruitment process the ability to assess whether a person is coming in with previous demonstration of the behaviors you want to see? So what do we need to start doing differently in that respect? Number 1, we need to go beyond hiring, again, those who are the smartest, the most experienced. All of that is good, but we need to go beyond that to recruiting people who can show that they have previously demonstrated the behaviors you're seeking to see. As HR practitioners, I know you have had sleepless nights trying to shift attitudes of employees. It's almost easy to work on technical competencies. Send them on a training course, have them take a degree, get them on a reading program. But attitudes, I'm sure, are what keep you up at night. And many times when we're talking about culture, we're often talking about attitudes that reflect and show up in certain types of behavior. However, if you start getting better at recruiting people who are able to demonstrate to you that in previous jobs, they already are coming with those values. They've already demonstrated those behaviors, you know that you're already ahead of the game. So that is the third action to remedy this mistake. Get better at recruiting much more broadly so you're getting the right types of people coming in. So it's how you ask the kinds of questions in recruitment about, give me examples of a previous time in another job where you demonstrated this behavior even when it may have compromised your ability to stay in that job. It's showing you that person's commitment to that value from the beginning. And this is hard to do when you're rushed. I know many times all of you are under pressure to recruit. Somebody has left, you've got to get somebody in that place. But when you're taking your time to do recruitment properly, then you're better able to go beyond what's on paper to the attitudinal issues. Fourth mistake we make. And this is often a real tough one, we don't hold staff accountable to desired behavior. We will say one thing, people will behave in a different way, and we struggle with the issue of accountability. So what do we need to do in that respect? We need to get better at aligning rewards and sanctions. Kobina mentioned earlier this whole issue of the carrot and the sticker. Culture is often influenced by what people observe. They walk into the place and they say, what behavior is rewarded in this company and what behavior is sanctioned, regardless of what's on paper. They can immediately see it. So it's important to align that formally, ensure that people are rewarded for the appropriate behavior, but also, and this is always the tough part, ensuring that there are proper mechanisms to sanction, whether it's through, and sanctioning I use in a broad sense. Many times it could be about coaching, it could be about training, but it's ultimately about holding people accountable. And finally, the fifth mistake we make, and this is more broadly about change. as we're seeking to inculcate change in others, seeking to change patterns of behavior that make up our organizational culture, somehow we seem to be the implementers out there, forgetting that fundamentally your ability to influence change will be dependent on your ability to model the change. So don't leave yourselves as the HR practitioners out of the picture. Look in the mirror. I talked about organizational looking in the mirror, but for yourselves, look in the mirror, get feedback. If I'm part of a process that's defining the behavior I would like to see in my new organizational culture, look within to see to what extent am I modeling that behavior. If it is about a team, to what extent does my team model that behavior? And most importantly, invest in yourselves, particularly around the inner work, the personal development, the emotional intelligence, because a lot of these issues around culture are not so much about technical competencies. They're about values, they're about character, they're about ethics. It's about who you are as people, and that doesn't come overnight. That comes from looking within and doing your inner work to make sure you model the way. So I will stop at that. Thanks again. If you need the full slides, do share with us the copies. Look forward to your Q&A. Thank you.
Let's put our hands together for Taaka Awori once again. We will take a Q&A. If you have any contributions you want to make, or better still, you want to ask a question, just flag your hand and then we'll bring you a microphone.
My name is Amma from MTN Ghana. I must say a very brilliant presentation, very practical, and it's the sort of thing that I think HR people should be looking at. I liked your touch on vital behaviors to underpin values. Okay. Where you belong to organizations where values are entrenched in global values, not just a country value, and you see vital behaviors that need to evolve to speak to how people actually behave culturally, how do you align the two?
Thank you. My name is Marian Kwatindra, Ghana Meteorological Agency. Yes, I agree with my sister, a very brilliant presentation. Thank you. I really got it very well, and I was happy with the mistake number 2. We exempt leaders from modeling the behavior we want to see. Most of the time, we leave our leaders out with the training, and we get a lot of challenge and very frustrated. And I just want to give one practical example to help us that we should really take this mistake seriously and work it out. The answer being that we should help them, try to get them through the training that we think will help in the overall working of the culture. My boss and I were trying to work on getting a policy to handle talent wastage in my organization. It's a very scientific organization, but fortunately, some of the technical officers are trying to shift into other areas like HR, admin, procurement. Interest was shifting in those areas. They've gone for training to the extent of some of them having masters. They come and they are still sitting on their technical officer desks. And nothing to see how to migrate them to help in this area. And we had come out with a policy to help with this. It faced a very stiff challenge. And then, fortunately, Public Services Commission, together with our professional body, Institute of Human Resource Manager Practitioners, organized a training for chief executives. I decided not to let this waste. As soon as I saw the letter, I started being extra friendly with the Director General. And then, fortunately, he ministered it to my boss. My boss ministered it to me. I highlighted it and went. And I said, this is a very good thing for you. He said, I have another program there at Parliament House with a committee on communication. I said, this one, delegate. Let somebody go for that one. In fact, he attended the meeting with me. And I can confidently say that he was one of the few CEOs who stayed through at the end of the program. It was a whole day program at the Service Training Center. And when we came, the following week was a management meeting. They
Summarize for us,
don't allow me to be part. And then the management meeting after that, he allowed my boss and I to implement that policy after that training. And the result of that policy, I have a deputy who is sitting here right with me, who has done her master's and was still a technical officer. And so please, these things we are learning, let's take the practical things out of it. It will help us in the organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, madam. So, a very useful intervention, but let's try to make it crisp and straight to the point so we can save time. Thank you, madam. That was useful. All right, a third question or contribution, and then Taaka will respond.
Thank you very much. My name is Abubakar Isuman. I work with Bank of Africa. Taaka, thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. I've had the opportunity to work with Taaka, so I know what she's capable of. For me, I think as HR practitioners, taking the leadership in ensuring that the culture is improved in an organization is key. And I just have a story. When I joined my current organization, we were going for a strategy session, and the preparation for the strategy session, I felt it had to go in a certain direction. So I went to my DMD and I said, I thought we should do X, Y, Z. So this one is not a training, it's just strategy, so it's fine. So we went for the strategy session, and the first person basically had his paper in his hand, so came to read out. And when it got to I was the second person to present. I came with a PowerPoint presentation. I had done a SWOT analysis, and so the way everything flowed, after my presentation, the meeting ended that day because everybody felt that they can't come and do anything else. Now people started saying, Babu, this small thing they can't do, you can't raise the standard. For me, I felt that a strategy session which is going to roll out our program for the whole year must be taken very seriously. So for me, it was a World Cup. And I think as HR practitioners, whatever we can do to ensure that a behavior we want to enforce stays in the organization, we have to take that leadership and make sure it is done and done properly. That's my contribution.
Good morning. My name is Vanessa from Enterprise Life. I would like to know, as an HR officer, would you sanction or reward an employee who is deviating from organizational culture but is very productive? Thank you.
Jabin from Vibrant of Africa. I want to find out when our leaders are not good in organizing what she was saying, but whenever you are trying to direct the person or train the person, he thinks he's a leader, so doesn't want to take your advice. What happens to that also?
Okay, thank you very much. So, Taaka, you have the floor.
Okay. Thanks very much for your kind feedback. Let me come across to Amma. I think Amma was the first question. I have indeed, and Amma asked the question, if I understood it, about how it's almost like how you co-create an inclusive culture, particularly when you're working with a company that's reflective of diverse cultures. There's a culture accompanying a culture from headquarters. There's a culture that's reflective of the society in which we work. And I think the key role for us as HR practitioners is the key word around co-creation. I think when we are so, sometimes I've seen companies, particularly multinational companies, that will be so stuck on headquarters culture, then you will start to see tension between those who feel that there should be space to talk about and think, what would it mean to live this culture in a way that's reflection of diverse values? Ultimately, there should be a bottom line about whether we're MTN in Ghana, whether we're MTN in Zambia. These are bottom lines in terms of values. But then I think there should be room to have a conversation about what does this look like in a Ghanaian context? What does this look like in a Zambian context? And it's about a conversation. And the work is that open and candid conversation. I hope I'm somewhat beginning to answer that. Mara, I so applaud you. Where's Mara again? There you are. I so applaud you. And I think the key point you're bringing up is when we're engaging leaders in the process, the kind of standard training courses might not be something they immediately jump at. So it is about exploring what are relevant mechanisms for bringing executives on board. So it may not be a training course where you're sitting there for 2 weeks. They simply don't have the time. In my experience, what has worked better with the C-suite, with the CEOs, the MDs, is often peer-to-peer learning events, because often their roles can be quite lonely. So opportunities to share with other CEOs, with other leaders about challenges is quite helpful. And then I'll go back to coaching. I think as a coach, I so strongly believe in the power of that one-on-one support. And I think globally, increasingly people are seeing the value of executive coaching to support those in very, very senior leadership positions. So continue to do your influencing and continue to find innovative ways of providing the leadership with the support they need to walk the talk. Huh? Abu, thank you very much. What I like about what Abu was bringing up with his story, his very vivid examples, was two things. One, about how you shift culture simply by the power of doing things differently. Do you see, just the courage to do things differently at that moment shook up the system so that people start to say, in the past, at this bank, this is how we do strategy meetings. He came and did it differently. So now strategy meetings are done differently. However, I think there's another point that you bring up from your story, Abu. The courage to be different. Shifting culture means that there will be moments where we do things differently from the norm. And this is where it comes to looking at yourself. We're all creatures of habit that want to belong. You don't want to stick out where people, remember even that comment that they made back to you. Huh? So this is where that fifth action about you doing your inner work, so that when you start to model behavior that others don't do, expect resistance. Expect people to challenge you. You may be standing alone, but that's how culture starts to shift. So Abu's story reflects to me his willingness to share the courage to do things differently and then start to shift culture. Vanessa, where is Vanessa? Where did you go? There you are. What do you do when they're planned? I've been in this situation before. When indeed you do have someone who's extremely productive, but the attitude is all wrong. I mean, how many of us have been in those situations before? Too many of us, huh? A key thing, and one of the things I did when I was in that particular situation, was to make it extremely clear that they were being held accountable not just on their results, but how they produced their results. So initially it was through one-on-one conversations, but also I had to start to look at our performance management framework and start to make sure when this person was being appraised, did they recognize that they weren't just going to be appraised on whether they met their results, but how they engaged with their teams, whether they were collaborating. So it was on paper. But I also had to go a step further to understand what was behind, underlying the quote unquote bad attitude. Too many times I've found a bad attitude is actually a cover-up for deep insecurities. Deeper issues that people need further support on. So on one hand, you're using both a carrot and you're using a stick. The carrot comes in terms of trying to understand what's going on, coaching again, that one-on-one mentoring, but the stick is there, accountability, accountability, accountability. People need to know at the bottom line that they will be held to account not just on their results, but how they deliver the results. And Benjamin, where are you? Final question. That's a tough one, but not an unusual one. Where if I understood Benjamin's question, you're seeking to influence a leader, but there's a sense of, and who are you? Who are you to tell me that? Why should I even change? With that one, it is about strategizing. And often I say leadership is about influence. And this is where HR leadership comes in. To have influence, you may not have authority. So you may not have authority over that particular leader, but you can seek to influence them, maybe not directly. I would study the person and see who else could influence them. Who else can have a voice when it comes to them? How can I put this on the table so it becomes very difficult for them not to respond to this? So the key thing is not to see yourself as powerless, but to recognize that if this approach doesn't work, it's about thinking what other strategies can work, because that's a very real type situation. And I think that was the last one, so thank you all again.